Thanks for coming on today, Barry.
Thanks, Adam.
Really excited to have you here.
I see the very best in people, but I also see the very worst as well, which is interesting because it usually revolves around money. But it's really nice because I'm doing an area of law which I'm in love with. I don't do divorces, I don't do boundary disputes. I just concentrate on making people feel more relaxed and comfortable with what they've put into place.
Before you did retire, what was the biggest case you still think about the most?
You had a child killer who killed 2 children, but had actually, prior to killing the children, had committed a murder, and we didn't detect that. And I ended up going round to the family whose child had been killed subsequently to say, look, we've found out who killed your children, of course, but we actually knew that he'd committed a murder 3 years previous.
Thanks for coming on today, Barry.
Thanks, Adam.
Really excited to have you here. What I like to do with all of the guests that we have on, I like to take it back to the start. I want to find out about your whole life from the beginning and how it shaped you as the man you are today. So take me back to the beginning. How did it all start for Barry Halliday?
Right, okay. My goodness, that makes me sound very old already, I think. Right, so I grew up in the north of England.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't wait really to leave the family home, so I left very early, as soon as I could. Came to Oxford, joined Thames Valley Police, and that became my family, really. So that gave me the structure, taught me what I needed to know, because I genuinely felt there was a gap between that, and so policing was great for me. So did my full service, retired at the age of 47, and thought I'm far too young to retire. Having said that, I was quite excited about it. Ended up working for a company called Police Mutual, which the Police Mutual Society was designed to help cops in crisis, a charity sort of based funding. I then realised after about 18 months it was sort of migrating into sort of an insurance, banking institution. And I just thought, you know what, this is not for me. So I handed back the company car, nice salary. So I thought, this is not for me. I don't, I'd already retired with a nice pension. At 47. So I thought, no, that's not for me. And then I'd already qualified in law anyway when I was in policing. So I did my law degrees whilst I was still in service. And then tied up with Andrew, who is the CEO of Secure Inheritance. Really liked him, liked his ethos, his integrity, his belief in what he wanted to do. And I've been with Andrew ever since. So now all I do, which is great really, because I'm in an area of law which has got nothing to do with policing. But it's interesting that skills are so transferable, because I'm a nosy so-and-so. So
That's where it stemmed from then.
Going around to people's houses is great because, you get a good chance to have a really good chat with people. They get to know you. And I'm doing an area of law which is not, if you like, looking after the baddies. Although I do see some horrible things in my job. I see the very best in people. But I also see the very worst as well, which is interesting because it usually revolves around money. But it's really nice because I'm doing an area of law which I'm in love with. And it's really nice because that's all I do. I don't do divorces, I don't do boundary disputes, don't do any of that. I just concentrate on making people feel more relaxed and comfortable with what they've put into place. So I love it, really.
It's interesting. I want to probe a lot more on that law kind of side and how you really transitioned from being in the police to doing what you do today in law. I found what you said really interesting there about when you moved down from Oxford. So you're living up north, and why was it Oxford out of all the places? Was that because you had a spot in the police, or any reason why?
I'm smiling because, right, so the story is I wanted to perhaps get as far away from sort of my family life, as it were.
Yeah.
So I quite liked Inspector Morse.
Okay, and it's
which is ironic because the theme tune is the same theme tune I use when I go on the cruise ships when I do my talks. But I really liked Inspector Morse, so I was fascinated with Thames Valley.
Yeah. Okay.
So I applied to Thames Valley because I wanted to go to Oxford.
Yeah.
Went to Oxford for training, and then my first posting was in Milton Keynes, which was bizarre, really, because it was nothing like Oxford. Yeah. It was an up-and-coming city, so it was really bizarre.
Yeah.
Because everybody lived behind these hedges.
That's right.
So it was a bizarre thing, really. So I thought I was moving to Oxford, and it was going to be this lovely place, just like the Inspector Morse. Nothing like it.
And so it's 18 years old. You move into Oxford. You get into the police. And when you got into the police, was that kind of the standard police constable role?
Mm-hmm.
So you've gone on the training course in Oxford. You think, I'm going to be like the real Inspector Morse. You pass out. You go into Milton Keynes.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of time was this around? Is it like late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, so 86, 87.
Right. So, okay, yeah. So Milton Keynes at that time, as you say, is up and coming. People living behind hedges. It's still a strange place now.
It is.
It's still a very strange place in my view. Even I've got family members that live there, but I still think it's strange. What was that like when you'd kind of, because it's still quite a young age, 18, isn't it? What kinds of issues, crimes were you dealing with in Milton Keynes at that time?
I very quickly liked the idea of being what was called at the time an area beat officer.
Right, yeah.
So the most difficult, challenging estate was the Lakes estate in Bletchley.
It still is, I think, isn't it?
Still got its challenges. So I started policing there, and I did that for 5 years. And I absolutely loved it. And the best way I can describe it for the Lakes estate, first of all, it blew my mind because I did see some really, really good people on that estate.
Yeah.
But then I saw some really bad things. And I suppose the best way of describing it is, for me, being a young cop, I actually saw life with the lid off.
Yeah.
I saw everything. And I was a kid. Yeah. So I was going around to sort of domestic disputes.
Yeah.
And I was a kid. And I'm telling this unfortunately, it was usually a man to say, look, your behaviour, you can't be doing that. And they go, you're a kid. Who are you to tell me what to do?
Yeah.
Fresh faced, slim, the slim young man. And there's me telling a 40-year-old who's ripped his shirt off and wants to take me down to behave. So it was a really, and do you know what? That for me actually did me the world of good.
Why was that?
Just because it got you to engage properly. There's no point just because you wear a hat, because then all policemen have these really tall, nice hats, and you always look smart.
Yeah.
It's very different now, I have to say.
Yeah.
But, there's this business around, commanding respect.
Yeah.
And you had a role to play. And when you put your hat on, it was business. And it gave me that structure. It gave me that purpose. And it made me grow. So that was a bit northern then, wasn't it? It made me grow.
Made me grow.
But it made me grow because I'd come across stuff that, I couldn't even believe was going on. For example, and it's no secret because I've talked about it previously, but one of the Cray's family lived on the Lakes estate.
Right.
An aunt.
Yeah.
And I used to go around there in the morning for a cup of tea.
Like most days.
Yeah.
Just
because a tea spot was really important when you're in the community. And it wasn't about, we've got a job to do here. It's, let's have a cup of tea and have a chat. What's going on?
And did you find that by going and having a cup of tea and having a chat with people in that area, that they would kind of be more open with Absolutely. You? If anything was going on and they weren't particularly happy, would you hear about it when you're having your cup of tea?
Yeah, because I realised very quickly, actually, that just because you put a uniform on, you don't actually command respect. You know, they'll still take you down.
Yeah.
Whether you've got a hat on or not.
Yeah.
However, you were able to at least talk at the right, I say level, and that's not about, you know, underclass sort of territory. I'm talking about just engaging with them, not as, you know, PC Halliday, but as somebody that actually gets it. And actually, I know there's 5 warrants for you, and we have to deal with it. But you know, you've got a school appointment at 11 o'clock. I'll come and see you afterwards.
Yeah.
And providing you don't let me down, we'll go to the Nick and deal with the 5 warrants.
Yeah.
After you've been to school.
That sounds like you're giving them respect and getting respect back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that got me, I think, that foundation got me an ability to be able to talk to people, whoever they were. So if you were the craze aunt who talked to a point where at one point I couldn't understand her because she was so... London accent was so strong. I used to say to her, I don't understand what you're saying.
Young lad from up north.
Yeah. And she said, well, I don't understand what you're saying half the time. So it was interesting, but it blew my mind. But what it did, I think, because I very quickly then, because I only joined the police just to be a policeman. That's what I joined. I wasn't interested in being a sergeant, wasn't interested in inspector, certainly nothing like I ended up with. But it clearly demonstrated to me and those that supervised me that actually there was a better quality there that went beyond just what I was doing. So I very quickly then ended up on the promotion ladder, and but I loved it.
And how did that, what was kind of the next stage of promotion? How did that happen from you having your cup of teas with the craze aunt, and you know, they obviously saw something in you, the police, that thought, you know, we could develop Barry. How did that progression happen quite quickly?
Yeah. So good leadership, good managers, good supervisors, but proper supervisors. They're all over you.
Yeah.
You know, my sergeants, you know, they were ruthless.
Yeah.
But they also knew who was doing a good job.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny thing, and it's always stuck in my mind, and bless him, he was unfortunately one of the postmasters who sadly took his life.
Oh.
When he retired, he went to be a postmaster back up in Yorkshire, and his I obviously, you know, this guy was a really good sergeant, but he was so hard.
Yeah.
And me and a friend of mine, Colin, we were sick and tired of doing nights and never getting in the Panda car.
Yeah, you wanted to get in the car.
The sergeant would always send us down the Queensway and into Fenny Stratford.
Oh, God, yeah.
Which was, you know, and our job was to check all the shops, make sure that we've had no burglaries. And we'll be tired if you went off duty and there was a burglary that someone didn't discover until the shop opened. And I said to Colin, we were getting changed one night and it was snowing. And I said, I'm really fed up with Sergeant Brandt. I said, I'm gonna call him out. If he puts us on foot again tonight, I'm going to call him out, and I need you to back me up. And Colin goes, yeah, I'll back you up. So we go into the parade room, and then Sergeant says, right, Barry, you'll go 3-2, and Colin, you'll go 3-4, which meant foot patrols.
Yep. So
we're both doing foot patrols. The golden boy gets to go out in the fast car with the blue lights.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, you know, we should be doing that now.
Yeah.
You know, this is... So in the end, I'm being the northerner. So I say to this sergeant, I said, Sarge, it's snowing outside. You know, can we not get in a Panda car tonight? You know, we've been out all week. Yeah. It's not fair. Me and Colin are always doing it.
Yeah.
You're not giving us a break. And I haven't got any wellies anyway. I said, because the snow's really, really bad. And he went, in a northern accent, Yorkshire. He went, well, you only live up the road in Eaglestone. I said, yeah. He said, right, you're on foot patrol. He said, so I'm going to give you half an hour to get in your car, go home, get your wellies, come back, and then you're on foot patrol with Colin. Colin, in the meantime, doesn't say a word. It's just me.
He wasn't backing you up then.
And basically, I then said to the sergeant, well, I've only got green wellies. I can't wear green wellies. he said, "Who's going to see you at 2 o'clock in the morning, apart from a burglar? And he won't worry about what colour wellies you've got." But the thing is, that was the thing, that they were really good supervisors.
Mm.
And I do worry. I've got concerns now that, unfortunately, we just lose sight of that strong leadership, strong, almost intrusive, because they were cultivating you,
yeah,
and they were going to make you bigger and better and stronger, and you then cultivate your own team. And I think that's why I ended up being, I would say, a good supervisor as you went through the ranks. But I was only made like that because of people like that. They were so intrusive and so in your face, and woe betide if you didn't do your job.
And do you think that's what built your resilience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as I said, I think the police became my family because they gave me all that structure. They gave me all that, and I wasn't stupid, far from it, but I think I was naive with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
For example, I'd never been in a proper fight until I joined the police.
Oh, God. Tell me about that.
My first fight, it was at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was on my own, and it was a full-blown fight.
Full punch-up?
Yeah. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. So you go back to your training and, and it was amazing because I actually realised I'd actually paid attention during self-defence training. But yeah, I mean, my first fight, I think I was about 19, 20.
This is in Milton Keynes.
On the leg.
In the middle of the night.
Serpentine Court, 3 o'clock in the morning, burglar.
Really? So you were just patrolling around, doing your foot patrol?
Yeah.
No Colin?
No, just me.
And you saw it. Tell me what happened.
Well, they were breaking. He was breaking into the shop.
Oh yeah.
So I heard all this banging, went up to Serpentine Court, saw the window had gone in, called it, and I basically waited for him to come out. As soon as he come out with his fags, I chased him, pinned him down, and then we had this full-blown fight. And he was off. He was on one.
Yeah.
And so he was really strong. I was only a skinny kid.
Yeah.
And he was about, I don't know, 28, maybe 30.
Okay.
And he was quite, so yeah, he was giving me a run for my money. And in the end, when I eventually got him on the floor, there's a way that you can control somebody by just moving your legs and just spreading yourself out to keep your balance. And I did that until the cavalry arrived.
Wow.
But yeah, that was my first fight. I was well chuffed.
Yeah, victory.
Got my burglar. But the thing is, that's the funny thing. You go back in to your sergeant.
Yeah.
And I said to him, to this sergeant, I said, "Oh, do I get a pat on the back then, Sarge, for getting this burglar?" And he went, "What you paid for?"
Literally, yeah. No bells and whistles.
No. So even then, but you see, actually he's right.
Yeah.
That's your job.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was great. And just by default, I ended up going on the promotion ladder because they identified you as potential. I was on this sort of fast track promotion route.
Yeah.
Because they saw the potential. And then, very quickly, within 5 years, I became a sergeant. Then within 2 years, I became an inspector. And then, of course, you're then on this road to...
Is that once you become the inspector, is that once you start doing investigations?
No. So you tend to find a niche.
Yeah.
So whether you want to, give people 3 points and catch somebody speeding, which I obviously wasn't for me, I'm afraid. Always been a petrol.
So people actually want to do that?
Yeah, sadly, yeah. But me being a petrol head, that wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of being in CID and investigating. Still going back to those Morse pictures. And indeed, I mean, you're too young, but look up Google.
Yeah.
Juliet Bravo. So Juliet Bravo was a program where it was a sergeant, a female sergeant, who basically looked after all this, and it was a northern-based police station. Loved it.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. So that's what I wanted to be. So That's all I did. But then, of course, you find your niche. I ended up going into the investigation route as a detective. So as a young DC, so a detective constable, and then of course I became a detective sergeant, and then I tended to stay in the CID investigation arena. But then you go through the ranks as well, because wherever you are, and whatever rank you are, there's a role. And certainly when you get to inspector and chief inspector, you end up managing investigations as well as managing your own investigations, whether that's homicide or
And what was your niche when you were in CID? What were the kind of crimes that you were getting involved with and investigating?
So I went into major crime territory. So homicide, organised crime, protection unit. So dealing with domestic violence, dealing with paedophiles. Then I went into the sort of more specialist area of covert assets. So witness protection, undercover policing, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I found myself in a very, very exclusive sort of niche market, really, which was great because it allowed you to enjoy doing the job that you wanted to do. But you was also in a position of rank where you could influence, which was good, really, because you were starting to make a big difference for families who became victims, surviving victims perhaps of a homicide or, a rape or anything like that. So as I progressed, so for example, before I became the area commander in Milton Keynes, before I retired, prior to that, I was in major crime and I headed up the cold case murder review team. So basically our job was to look at all the old cases.
They'd kind of just gone dead.
Yep. Yeah. So I love that job. So that was a bit like the silent witness that we would know today.
So you were becoming the more and more like the real life Inspector Morse as you progress through your career.
Yeah. And certainly when I talk on cruise ships now, my headline is the real Inspector Morse.
There you go.
Yeah.
So what it sounds like to me is that you've had this dream up north, you've moved down to Oxford, gone into Milton Keynes, developed through the police, and you have actually become Inspector Morse, Inspector Halliday, and that was your dream and your vision, wasn't it?
Yeah. It gave me everything I dreamt of, really. But at the same time, it really gave me that family values and responsibilities, and and it was tough, really, because I was young, I married young. There's so much going on, and there's so much to learn.
Yeah.
But it was like a whirlwind, really.
And you say that it gave you that family. Did you have any specific mentors at the time within the police that you looked up to?
There's some great people I looked up to. And I also saw some people that weren't being protected very well as well, who I really rated. So it was interesting in the police because you did see some unfairness sometimes as well. Really? So yeah, I did. Mentoring was really important for me because they're the ones that schooled you, that directed you, that gave you some wise counsel. And I was always up for... It's interesting, really, because I try and say this to my daughter, but self-reflection is really important.
100% agree.
And sometimes you can be almost too critical. I'm probably very critical of myself, but you also need somebody that will obviously give you wise counsel, but will also put things in perspective for you.
Yeah.
So that self-reflection, by definition, I think, if you're a good person who self-reflects, you'll probably be overcritical.
Yeah.
By default, I think. And that's fine. But you also need somebody to say, you know what, that's all right.
Yeah.
Because actually, you've actually done a great job. So I didn't really get that when I was growing up. So getting that in policing, so mentoring for me and people I looked up to, just put you right when you was feeling really
Yeah.
You got it wrong.
That makes sense. And like that, you've touched on, you didn't have that when you were growing up and you found your family in the police. Did you mentioned there about some unfairness? I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it or not. No.
No, I can, because I as a young, it was interesting because policing was going through all this, the rapid change. So, for example, police staff started to get heavily involved in policing. So you'd have like, at the time, there was a chief inspector of prosecutions.
Yeah.
I was meticulous with my files, typical detective.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything was, it was underlined and all perfect and all presented properly. And I would go into the prosecution's office and have a good relationship with the ladies and the men to make sure that my case was going to get to court. And, and I knew that was important, that relationship.
Yeah.
And the chief inspector, I really rated, because if he would say to you, "That's a crap file, Barry.
Yeah.
It's not good enough." And he was great. We then was confronted with his counterpart, who was police staff and was technically his rank.
Yeah.
In police staff territory.
Sure, yeah.
I didn't get on with her.
Yeah.
I clashed with her straight away.
God, yeah.
And I couldn't understand why I was clashing.
Yeah.
And I was being sort of defensive, and I was young as well, so I was sort of challenging her. And she made a point of telling me, "Can I remind you who you're talking to?"
Oh, she actually said that?
Yeah. She said, "You're talking to someone of the same rank as the chief inspector."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I don't care."
Yeah.
And I was a typical sort of young. Now, what happened there is that chief inspector, unfortunately, was facing allegations of sexual misconduct. And this lady had made allegations. And I knew that she wasn't a very nice person. And all of a sudden, we knew the chief inspector vanished. Didn't know why.
And this is why you were left with her.
Yeah. So, but we knew something had gone on, but obviously I was just a young detective. So they weren't going to tell me why a chief inspector was suddenly out of post.
Yeah.
But then this inspector came to see me at Bletchley, and he said, "Can I ask you about this chief inspector in prosecution?" So I said, "Yeah, who are you?" And I was terrified.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And he said, "Well, I'm representing the chief inspector because are you aware that an allegation has been made against him? And the person that's made an allegation is the person that you seem to clash with. And I want to know why you clashed with her." And I said, "Well, I don't like her." I said, "She was terrible." And he said, "Well, tell me why." And I said, "Well, she was very quick to throw a rank at you." I said, "I found her really rude, unhelpful. She was constantly dissing, really, the chief inspector. I can make the decision. I don't need you to go to the chief inspector." And I said, "Well, I want to go to the chief inspector." "Well, who do you think you are?" And it was that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So this inspector said to me, "Would you make a statement?"
Yeah.
That would be a defense statement, because we need to demonstrate who this person is, because we feel that she's had it in for him. Now, I didn't know anything about this. This was the first time I was involved in this, because I rated this man highly.
Yeah.
And in the end, it went to a tribunal, and the chief constable at the time was a guy called Colin Smith, a very, he commanded this very aloof, and if you was in a room with him, you'd quake.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the tribunal, sitting on this chair, and he's at this big desk in the chief constable's office with two other high-ranking officers. Never experienced anything like this before. And I gave my witness statement. Yeah. And Colin Smith, the chief constable, he said, "I've listened very carefully to what you've had to say. And let me be clear, I'll be speaking to your chief superintendent when this tribunal is over. Get out."
She said, "Get out."
Yeah. So I left. And I basically, I was very supportive of this chief inspector. This inspector came, the inspector who would come to see me, he said, "You did a great job. Thank you very much. We'll just have to wait and see what happens." The chief inspector came out of the tribunal about an hour later, taking his epaulets off. and basically been demoted.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he'd lost the case, got demoted to sergeant, and he was crying. And I'd seen this old man. I'll say old man. He wasn't that old, but to me he was old.
Yeah.
Crying. I couldn't get my head around it. And then I was summoned to the command. I mean, even thinking about it now is making me bloody get emotional. But
I can see,
I sat down with this area commander and I said, why are we doing this to good people? I said, she was terrible. And he said, I know. He said, but Barry, sometimes you've got to pick your fights.
Is that what he said?
He said, no, I'm not saying you've done a bad thing. He said, but the chief constable's got concerns about you because the way that you have behaved, he feels, towards a police staff member is inappropriate. He said, I don't agree with him. He said, I think she's toxic.
Yeah.
And he was an old school, this chief superintendent. But he said, we're stuck with this. He said, we're going to appeal it. He says, but I'm afraid we're stuck with it. And I said, this is just wrong.
Yeah.
This is fundamentally wrong. And it brought this man, and he was off sick, and he'd gone from quite a portly chap to thin as a lat. He'd lost all this weight. Stress.
Yeah.
He won his appeal.
He won it. Good.
6 months later, he won his appeal. That inspector, who I'd never met before, who was on the drug squad, I later learned, became my chief inspector.
Oh, really?
And I didn't know. And he came in the office and he went, Halliday. He said, can I have a word? I'm thinking, okay. So I went into this office and he said, look at what name's on the door. And his name was Morrison, Stephen Morrison. Great influenced me so much.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm now your boss. He said, are you pleased that you made the right decision all that time to support?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I only did it because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
If I didn't think he was a good man, I would not have done it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, that's why I liked you. And then he became my mentor and got me promoted, looked after me, great counsel, lovely, lovely man. Sadly, he got dementia in his latter years and he's passed away now. But yeah, he was almost like a father, really.
He was that like father figure.
And yet I met him through grief and where we as an organisation had treated somebody badly because it was the right thing to do. Because this was don't get me wrong, the police had to adapt. We were changing. And you can't be a dinosaur.
Yeah.
But that particular member of staff was toxic. Nothing to do with the fact she was a woman.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with it. Her behaviour was terrible and she had to be challenged. And it was clearly obvious that, and the chief inspector said it was all fabricated, which was terrible.
Do you think it was fabricated so she could further advance where she was trying to go? And briefly, what happened to her?
She left.
Funny that, eh?
Yeah. Her argument was there was no need for a chief inspector being paid all this money to be the head of prosecutions when she was more than capable of doing that on her own.
Wow. So it just sounds like her ego, essentially.
Yeah. And the thing is, it was terrible, really, because we suddenly started to feel that we were being surrounded by police staff. We needed police staff. And if it wasn't for the police staff who worked just as hard as the cops, we would not have been able to do our job. So it wasn't a case of there was resistance. It was you can be a good cop and you can be a bad one.
Yeah.
Exactly the same with police staff. And I just felt it was wrong what we were doing.
Yeah.
I stood up, got bitten badly. But you know what? Actually, looking back on it, it was the best thing I ever did.
This is it. It goes to show in the end, it was the right thing, doing the right thing.
It was the integrity of it. Actually, I didn't realise just how that would impact my career afterwards.
And at that point in your career, I mean, you're in CID at the time, you're putting together investigations, you're starting looking at all these cold cases. How did things progress? Because I know you said that you retired at 47. What, before you did retire, what was probably the biggest case, or not necessarily the biggest, but the case you still think about today the most? Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah. So I think when you get into a significant rank in policing, you are able to influence.
Yeah.
Which is great because you have a team. So I headed up the cold case murder review team. And there was a case, and I actually talk about this, and certainly the Sky Productions that I do, I also talk about this as well. But the law changed whereby you could be rearrested if further evidence comes to light for a serious offence, and you could be tried again. So prior to the law changing, and it was called the double jeopardy rule, if you were acquitted by a jury, you could not be tried again. That's the rule.
Despite new evidence.
Yeah, that's the rule. And you could actually come out and admit it, and we could not charge you.
So you could say, I just, really?
Yeah. So the law changed, and then there was double jeopardy legislation, which basically meant if there was compelling new evidence, you could rearrest somebody and put them before the court, even though they'd been tried with that offence. So one of these cases, which was sadly the terrible murder of a lady called Vicky Thompson in Oxford. She was murdered. Chap in the village was arrested. He was charged, put before the court, and he was acquitted.
Jury acquitted.
Of the murder. 10 years later, me and my team arrested this individual. We had to go through lots and lots of hoops, as you can imagine. Got him back into Crown Court, charged him with murder, and he's now serving life for murder.
Wow.
And this was the first case in England and Wales where I prosecuted somebody for a crime that they'd been acquitted of.
Wow.
And as a result of that case, there's been a few others. So I suppose that was my most challenging, most rewarding, because it was a terrible thing for the family. You know, the News of the World were really interested in whether there was a backstory, was the husband involved, all this sort of stuff. The family went through terrible, terrible times. And yet 10 years later, you know, we had to go and sit down with the family and say, right, I think we can now progress this.
And what was that evidence as well that kind of came to light in that time?
So again, I've talked about it on Sky Television, but in reality, what it was, forensic submissions at the time were done to the best of their ability years ago. Years later, of course, we've got all this lighting. We've got more training, DNA advancements. And what we actually did is we unpicked the leather boot that we recovered from Mark Weston, who was the guy that was accused. We unpicked the boot and we found Vicky Thompson's blood in the boot.
Whoa,
10 years later.
Wow. It literally took the boot apart.
Yeah. And with microscopic capability, we were able to find this compelling and new evidence.
Wow. And how did that make you feel at the time when you heard that news?
I mean, well, first of all, there's elation. Of course there is. Because, you know, you've got your man, as it were. But it's interesting because I still see it on the television now and I scream at the TV when it's usually cops or prosecutors where they go, oh, we've now got closure for the family. I hated that term because there's never closure. There might well be a resolution. There's never closure. And even when we went round to Vicky's family and we said, look, we've now arrested this guy. He's going back to prison. He's now been convicted. I mean, we're all in Reading Crown Court waiting for the jury to come back. You know, you wanted to punch the air. But then you went outside and all the press were there because this was the first case in England and Wales.
Yeah, massive case.
And, you have to be very careful how you speak to the nation. And, I never, ever said there's closure for a family, because I hate the terminology.
Because it never is.
There never is. And actually, that family went through torment again because they'd gone through this trial again. And, of course, they'd gone from a situation where they've got no faith in the judicial system, because, of course, he got acquitted already.
Yeah.
So whilst we trust you, Barry, and the team, and me and Peter, my deputy SIO, who's a brilliant guy, again, a seasoned detective, we were heading up this team, and there's always the risk that actually we've got the family involved in this, and actually we're going to get another acquittal.
Yeah.
How are we going to manage that?
Yeah.
So we have to be prepared for a not guilty and a guilty. So whilst you've got a guilty verdict and you want to punch the air with delight, you've got to take a breath and actually remember that we're still talking about somebody who died, and a family that's still in bits.
Yeah. That will never recover, really.
They never recover, but they learn to manage their recovery. And that's the best way of describing surviving victims. And then, there's other cases where there's another big case of ours where you had a child killer.
Blimey.
Who killed 2 children, but had actually, prior to killing the children, had committed a murder of a lone female, and we didn't detect that. I say we, the police.
Yeah.
And I ended up going round to the family whose child had been killed subsequently to say, look, we've found out who killed your children, of course, but we actually knew that he'd committed a murder 3 years previous. And how do you tell somebody that? Now, of course, the answer is we didn't know properly.
Yeah.
But you have to start looking at, did we do a good investigation at the time? Did we do a good job with what we had? So it was a really, Sarah Thornton, who was the chief, she was my boss at the time as an assistant chief. Then she became the deputy. Then she became the chief. Great admiration for Sarah. And she, another one, was another good, wise counsel, good mentor. You could have a lid-off conversation with her.
Yeah.
Even though she was the chief, now Dame Sarah. But she said to me, we have to be careful what monsters we let out the box. And she was right.
Yeah.
Because once you open that box, you've got to manage what you pick out. And sometimes you haven't got control of that. So when you go around and see a chap who's lost his child at the age of 8, and you say, actually, this same guy who's, doing time for the murder of your child, actually 3 years prior did a murder, and we didn't detect it. And you have to go around and tell him that. And I thought he was absolutely such a lovely man. And he said, Barry, it's not your fault. You did what you could at the time. The fact he got away with it, which was really quite humbling, really, because, I did think there was probably things we could have done.
Yeah.
And I talked about it with the Sky production team, and I talk about it on cruise ships because I think it's a really good way of demonstrating that, even though policing is tough, you don't always get it right.
Yeah.
Well, no one's infallible.
You can't, can you?
No.
It's impossible, yeah.
But there's times where you've also got to fall on your sword and say, look, we didn't get it right. So that's what we mean about this monster business, because if the monster means we have to declare that we didn't get something right, we have to be big and bold and honest enough to say that.
Yeah.
So, I think there's been some really good cases I did, which I think shape your thinking. And I do think it makes you a better person, really, because you just look at life a bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that it's moving. I can see the emotion in, but it's coming back in, and you're talking about it now. You mentioned there about cruise ships. So, I mean, how did you kind of transition, retire out of the police into, working with Sky Productions, going on cruise ships, being the real Inspector Morse? I mean, because that's super interesting.
The Sky stuff is interesting because, of course, you know, these production companies, you know, if they get commissioned to do a silent witness type thing. So I worked with Amelia Fox. So Amelia Fox was the real silent witness in the program, but of course she was also talking about the real silent witnesses. So that was interesting. So Sky Television was almost by default, really, because they knew about these cases. They wanted to hunt you down and talk to you.
I bet.
And I was willing to engage them. And actually the productions were really, really good.
Yeah.
And do you know why I did it, Adam? It was not because I was showboating or anything like that. It was because actually I think programs like that demonstrate to the public that actually, one, you're not infallible. Two, it gives... Listen, there's times I think where members of the public lose confidence in policing for whatever reason. And I've gone through that at some stage as well.
Yeah.
I think we all do. You know, something happens, or maybe something happens to our family, or maybe our neighbour.
Yeah.
And we start to question. And I think some of those programs, what they do is that they give you that bit of faith that actually there is some good work being done to lock up real serious baddies.
Yes.
So that's why I like doing that. The cruise thing was by absolute fluke. I liked going on the cruise ships as a holiday.
Yeah, don't blame you.
I'd never done it before, and an old boy who I'd used to meet every January on holiday, really nice fella, he said, "You should go on a cruise ship, you'd like it." I said, "Oh, I don't fancy that, full of old people." And so, and he said, no, you should try it. It's not full of old people anymore, you know. So I did. I went on this cruise ship, and I walked past this rather... She was a very attractive lady. She caught my eye.
Yeah.
And I was looking at her, and she looked at me.
Yeah.
And she came up to me and she said, "How are you enjoying your holiday?" I said, "I'm having a really, really nice time." And I'm thinking she's trying it on with me.
Yeah.
But don't get me wrong. I think, you know, I'm probably up for that. But so I think she's trying it on me. And she said, "Oh, would you like to have a coffee with me?" And I thought,
she's really trying it on now.
I thought, right, okay, this is a bit bizarre. So I said, "Well, I'd love to have a coffee with you, but I'm just about to go and do something. I can't remember what it was." And she went, "No." She said, I am the creative entertainment director on the cruise ship."
Oh, wow.
And I just wanted to know. She said, you seem to present yourself very well. What do you do for a living?" And I just said, you know, I said, "Oh, I've been in policing, blah, blah." She went, "Right, you're having a coffee with me."
Yeah.
And Cunard do this Insights program, brilliant program. And when you're on cruise ships, they have these speakers that come from all walks of life, including celebrities. And so the last one I was on that I talked to, the colleague I was working with was Dr. Hillary, who's on GMTV. and he was talking about COVID, you know, what happened during COVID. Fascinating guy. And Russell Watson was the singer on the stage the night before my presentation. So it's quite funny because I went on the stage and I said, "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, you know, I'm on the same stage as Russell Watson." He was a great opera singer. So this lady said to me, she said, "Oh, I'm really fascinated." She said, "Will you do me a one-pager about who you are and what you did?"
Like a summary of...
So I did it, thought nothing of it.
Yeah.
And then I got invited for an interview in Southampton. And since then, my next working cruise is in June on Queen Anne. And I talk about a couple of cases.
Yeah.
And I also talk about, you know, the Yorkshire Ripper, because that's where we did get things wrong.
Yeah.
And we have to start somewhere. And that's where really policing changed about how we investigate serious crime.
Yeah.
And so I do talk about that. And I also talk about why I left policing. So it's a real honest discussion. And then we do a Q&A as well. So the Insight program's brilliant. And not just, you know, my stuff, but some of the speakers are phenomenal.
Yeah.
So it's a great program.
Sounds great as well. And hey, and you get to go on some great cruises as well.
I do.
Do you, when you're on there, is it every night you have to speak, or is it just one night or a couple?
So
of
usually in a week, if you're cruising for a week, you might do 2 talks.
Yeah.
And a Q&A, informal.
That's amazing.
Q&A, which is great. And you meet some fascinating people.
I bet you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And usually there's always a retired policeman in the audience that comes to see me afterwards. They says, well, you got that slightly wrong, or, typical. But no, I that's the other fascinating thing. You don't know who's in that audience.
Yeah, I bet.
I'll tell you a funny thing.
Yeah.
I say about audience, you've got no idea. I was walking into the theatre as a guest on a holiday, and this voice behind me said, Halliday. And I was with my partner, and I thought, well, it can't be me, because I don't know that voice. So I carried on walking.
Yeah.
I didn't turn round, because as a policeman, you think of 2 things. You think either it's another policeman.
Yeah.
And I don't go on holiday to talk about policing.
Yeah.
When you're on holiday.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's the last thing you want. Or it's a villain.
That you've locked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the worry. So I ignored it. And the voice said again, Halliday. So I'm going to have to turn round. So I did. I turned round, and it was my old chief superintendent.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Called Mr. Page.
Yeah.
And he said to me, fancy you being on here? And I said, and he said, because he'd retired about 3 years before. I said, do me a favour, Mr. Page. And he went, you can call me Michael now, it's fine.
So he said that.
Rather than boss and sir. And he said, you can call me Michael now. I said, okay then, Michael, will you do me a favour? He said, yeah, of course, what is it? I said, say Halliday again. So he said, Halliday. I said, you can call me Barry now. And it was so nice, because normally this guy would only have his, because he'd always use his surname.
Yeah.
Old school.
Yeah.
So in the corridors, he'd go, Halliday, get in here. So doing it on the cruise ship was just a bit surreal.
I brought you back.
I made him call me Barry. I said, that's the first time you've called me Barry.
Yeah. Yeah.
He went, well, I have to now, don't I?
That's it.
So the point is that, I've found it fascinating that when I actually do the presentations, you'll get a cop coming to see you afterwards. You'll get a prosecutor.
Oh, yeah.
A defense lawyer.
Yeah.
It's amazing who you get in that audience. So you never know who you're talking to.
This is it. It's like we don't know who's going to be watching this now.
Yeah. So it's interesting, because sometimes, can you imagine, I often think about this. What happens if I'm talking and a member of the family, who is the baddie, if you like,
yeah,
is on the cruise ship?
Yeah.
Because, there's no exclusion zone. So you just don't know.
Yeah.
So I always worry sometimes what would happen if somebody did come and see me afterwards and said, oh, you're talking about my brother, or you're talking about my cousin. So you've got to be very careful about making sure that everything that you talk about is in the public domain.
Do you feel that you've just brought a point in my head there? You're thinking about that while you're on the cruise ships. Do you ever think about, you're at home, so-and-so's getting out of jail? Does that ever cross your mind, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does, because there's always a worry, because especially if you've dealt with some real interesting baddies. Yeah, there's always that. There's always a bit of a worry, really.
Yeah.
I think you've just got to be. Don't get me wrong. There's lots of people that won't do anything, but I think there is probably a handful of people that probably don't like you very much.
Just wrong uns, proper wrong uns.
Yeah. So you've always got to be a bit wary of things like that.
And you did your law degree while you're still in the police, right?
Yeah.
And when you came out, I mean, you touched on right at the start about meeting Andrew, who's at Secure Inheritance, where you are now. Tell me how you firstly decided to go into wills and estate planning, and how that's progressed. Because that's how I've met you, essentially.
Yeah, it is, yeah. And I've loved every minute of it. I don't regret. The law degrees were great because I managed to do them during my police career.
Yeah.
So I was supported to do those. So I never went to university as a kid, obviously. So that allowed me to grow a bit.
Yeah.
So I got these qualifications, but I couldn't use them per se because, of course, to leave policing without doing your full term would have meant I wouldn't have got a pension at the age of 47. So my hands were tied to some extent. So I had always, it wasn't a regret, but it was, I've got these qualifications and I'm not using them.
Yeah.
Although the argument was that you are using them. But,
yeah.
So I'd studied employment legislation, I'd studied family law, I'd studied constitutional law.
Wow.
I'd done all this stuff.
Yeah.
Done a thesis on the jury service and is it right for today's society? So really fascinating stuff. And I left policing, realised that I needed to do something else. I'd fallen poorly in the latter end of my career, which I still struggle with now. And I didn't want to work in a law firm, working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, doing jobs that, because if you're a mainstream lawyer, and you got qualified, I certainly didn't want to go into police stations representing people. So then it was going to be the civil route. Did I really want to worry too much about boundary disputes and all that sort of stuff? No.
Sounds horrendous.
So when I met Andrew, there was this, if you like, niche market, which just focused on people who wanted to sort out their estate. And what was interesting is that I could relate to that.
Yeah.
And I could only relate to it, I suppose, because of my homicide times.
Yeah.
Where I was suddenly confronted with a family that have lost a loved one and the mess that followed. And although I didn't realise until I'd left policing what that other mess was, everything was frozen, the probate court and all that.
Yeah.
All that stuff, which I knew was going on.
Yeah.
I suddenly started to realise that all this stuff was actually a real problem.
Yep.
So it wasn't going to be a lucrative job either. Because I had to say to Andrew that I had to be completely honest and say, look, I might not be able to work full time for you because there's going to be days where, I've got a chronic condition. I had to be honest with Andrew and say, look, there'll be days where I can't work for you.
Yeah.
There'll be days where I might have an appointment and I won't be able to go.
Yeah.
So I can't really do a full time job. So I don't want to work. I don't think it's a good fit. And Andrew said, no, I really, really feel that you will be a good fit for us. We want that legal expertise. We want you to be able to sit down in front of a client. You are qualified. You would do them a good service.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say I was reluctantly joined, but I thought I'll just give it a go and just see. Because if it's not for me, you know what? I've never looked back because I've absolutely loved it. And I've loved it because I'm actually, it's a bit like policing, I suppose. You're actually finding a resolution for somebody.
Yep.
And there is a great deal of comfort in getting things sorted. And it's not just about, I want to sort things out for when I die. It's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
Actually, it's about inheritance tax mitigation. It's about estate planning, bloodline planning, blended families, trusts, all this sort of stuff now.
Yeah. It's vast, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. And actually, a will is so important now.
Yeah.
Not just when you die, but actually when you're alive.
Yeah.
It's actually valid and of use to you when you're alive. And of course, people don't necessarily realise that because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Absolutely.
But I'm absolutely, I'm a bit OCD about it. So I know everything. I say I know everything, of course you don't know everything, but I make a point of trying to know everything because I want to make sure that my clients really, really get a quality, informed advice. Because what's interesting, Adam, and you're in an area of business which is so regulated.
Ridiculously.
Absolutely. To a point where you think, come on, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Sometimes you do, yeah.
The will industry, and it's going to change, and I can't wait. The will industry, you almost might as well put them on par as an estate agent, because that's another area of business. Yeah. And yet, do you know what? Estate agents, and I'm not criticizing estate agents, because you know they have a job to do, but it's an area of business where it is not regulated as far as an individual that walks into a house and does a valuation.
Yeah.
And I find that a bit worrying, that your biggest purchase, the biggest thing you're going to do, you go to an estate agent.
Yeah.
All they're interested in is, and don't get me wrong, they're there to earn a buck. They're selling you a house.
Yeah.
I get that. And a house is only worth what someone's prepared to pay.
Yep.
But wills, the industry where you are putting somebody and giving them your entire trust and confidence to look after you and your family and your treasures. It's interesting, my job, when I talk about treasures, the money, the houses, the cars, it's all very nice, thank you very much. But if there's one thing I've learned with my previous career, your treasures are your people, your family.
100%.
And if that means that you protect your treasures by protecting the physical stuff, which is just stuff, then that becomes relevant to protect your treasures.
Yeah.
So it's amazing when people say to me, and I don't care whether you're filthy rich or not, it's irrelevant. They said to me, I haven't got much, Barry. I've just got, I've got my 2 kids. I've got a little house that was at a council house, but it's now mine. It's paid off. I haven't got much. You've got everything.
Yeah, it's the kids as
You've
well.
got 2 kids that you love dearly.
Yeah.
You want to make sure they're both cared for. You've got everything. What do you mean you've got nothing?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
And they sometimes think, well, no, I'm probably, because I only deal with private clients now.
Yeah.
So it's fair to say an awful lot of my clients are high wealth. But I say to them, because it's interesting, because sometimes people with high wealth, they say, oh, am I going to be given a big bill because
big tax bill?
I'm worth. And I have to say to them, whether you're worth £5 million, or whether you're worth 100 grand, with your, ex-council property, whatever, the cost is still the same. Because all we're interested in is protecting what we need to do. And a trust costs this much. Whether it's the £3 million trust or whether it's £100,000 trust. And that's the nice thing about the integrity of Andrew and the integrity of having somebody that actually is legally qualified that can sit down and say, look, this is what you need to do. And I'm not interested in earning a fast buck.
Yeah, it's long-term, helping clients.
Yeah. And I think, what's also interesting, and I like it because I can say this to you because, and without blowing your own trumpet, I know, because you've looked after my own daughter, that you are client-centric like me.
Yeah.
You're passionate about what you do. And what's nice about that is that, when you sit down in front of a client and you give them everything that you've got, it's because you genuinely care.
Yes.
And it's not, my Maslow, I don't go out to work, not every day because I can't. I don't go out to work because I want to earn a shed load of money. Because the honest answer is, I don't need to earn a shed load of money.
That's it. Yeah.
I'm old enough and grumpy enough now to have everything I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
I've worked hard. I've achieved everything myself. I have a nice, healthy pension, so I'm very fortunate. I'm blessed compared to others who've worked hard all their lives and are still having to work. To fund a lifestyle. I go out now, and yes, my work does pay for nice things. Of course it does. Of
course, yeah.
And I'm not saying, and it would be disingenuous of me to say, that the money is not nice. Of course it is.
Yeah.
But I don't rely on it, and I don't go chasing it.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about that is that you look after people with the passion and belief of what you do, the product that you have, rather than the end fee.
100% agree with you. It's that I always see it as I'm helping this individual, and I don't even look at the money side of it to the end, but then the money just takes care of itself anyway. And you're like, oh, I earned that on that. And that's because you're so focused on helping the client achieve the goal they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I mean, we touched on there, unregulated industries like estate agents, and I completely agree with you. Any man and his dog can go out there and start writing wills. And you said this to me time and time again. That's really worrying. Especially, you know, you mentioned I'm in a highly regulated industry. You're legally qualified. You've had to jump through zillions of hoops to be able to provide the advice you give. And I think out there, generally, the days of the old high street estate agent hopefully is starting to die down now that you've got more and more, they call themselves like real estate agent. I think they're taking more of the American model on board, which is probably a good thing. I'm a big believer in they probably need to regulate it, do exams to be qualified. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I mean, nice things is great. I know you're a big petrol head as well. You're into your cars. Tell me about that. Tell me.
Well, you see, the thing is, just touching on this regulatory stuff.
Yeah.
Just before we do move on to the car stuff, is that I really do think that, you know, when you're dealing with people's biggest assets, and by that I go back to treasures again, the families, the children, you know, when you're dealing with that, and then, as you say, the money side of things is the transactional stuff. I find it incredible, and particularly during COVID, lots of people were trained to write wills, and lasting power of attorneys. And actually, they've got no. I'm not saying you need to be, you know, go to university and study law and do these degrees. I'm not saying that you cannot be a good will writer, and not have those qualifications. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that a will writer or somebody that can give good, solid advice. So I'm regulated. Now I'm self-regulated because I'm affiliated to Salix. So, you know, the regulatory body that, you know, if for example, someone complained about my advice and there was a complaint lodged against me, they could go to the regulatory body and I could be challenged. Now, a will writer who isn't affiliated with Salix, you know, if a complaint is made against them, and unfortunately I've had to deal with clients who've had problems, they probably don't even exist anymore.
Yeah, that's the worry.
So, you know, I you know, gained those legal qualifications, referred myself and got accredited with Salix because I wanted, you know, people to be able to go to a body that dealt with, you know, executive lawyers to say, look, this person has let me down. So I do think the estate agents are certainly up in their game. And I think the will writing society, we are upping our game, but there are still, unfortunately, lots of people out there that are not giving the right advice. And it's more focused on the fee outcome.
Or people doing it £100 wills. I mean, what value are you going to get for a £100 will?
It's disastrous. But, you know, I will also, I will do a will which will only charge £139 if you wanted. If it means that all you want to do is give everything to your loved one, you don't need a complicated will. So again, it's not about the money, but I I think for me now, I'm in a nice position where, I did retire, doing a job that I love again. So to have two careers in your lifetime, both of which that you love, you're very, very fortunate.
Blessed, yeah.
But yeah, I am a bit of a petrol head. I've always liked cars ever since I was a kid. My first car was an Austin Allegro, which you'll probably have to Google to find out what that was. But
yeah,
it's
Can we put a picture on the screen, maybe?
an Austin Allegro Estate. It was, of all things, bronze color, but I loved it.
Yeah,
it was my first car, and it had a square steering wheel, which is bizarre. It was bizarre. You can still see them on eBay. And I occasionally look at the
You're gonna go
section.
Buy one.
So I've always been interested in cars. And as I progressed, and I got a bigger and a better car.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've always been a bit of a petrol head. When I retired from policing, I bought myself my first Bentley.
Nice. Yeah.
And I still have a Bentley today, which still represents the same model that I bought when I retired, which is the Bentley GT. Because I love, I think, and I sometimes my clients say to me, "Oh, well, you're earning good money because you turn up in a car like that." And I said, "Yeah, but if I turned up in a Ford Fiesta that is all rusty, and would you actually question whether I'm good at my job or not?"
Yeah.
So we have a bit of a laugh about it. But can I just explain my story? Because I don't mind if clients actually who instruct me end up becoming quite close with me. So because we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
So I see them every year. We get on, we talk. So they tend to know an awful lot about me. And once they know my backstory and they know why I drive that car, it's just because I wanted something to demonstrate that actually, you know what, I can sit back now and say, I've done a good job. This is the little thank you. This is for me. Because unfortunately, I'm one of these people. I like gifting rather than buying something for yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't smoke.
Yeah.
I don't drink.
Yeah.
Certainly to excess. I'll have a drink occasionally.
Yeah.
I don't gamble.
Yeah.
I don't really have any vices in that sense. So I think, well, what else do I have? So what I do have, I do like a nice meaty car.
Yeah.
Having a bit of fun.
Absolutely.
Making sure I don't get caught speeding. Sorry. So I have done.
Yeah.
So, and no, I can't get a speeding ticket taken away either. You pay it like everybody else, or go to the course like I have done.
Yeah, those courses.
So I see that as being a sort of, it's a great. I think it's nice to have some interests,
like an outlet.
Yeah, and I see that as I enjoy travel. I enjoy doing my job. It helps sometimes to pay for little nice things, but it's not the driver.
Yeah.
The driver is making people feel good, content, happy with what they've done. And so, yeah, there's almost a bit of policing in that as well, because you do the same thing. There's that resolution and there's that breathing. You go and see clients and they're really anxious and you sit down with them, you talk to them, you go through all their stuff. You explain things to them, and actually it's not that hard, it's not that difficult.
Yeah.
I used to wear a pinstripe suit.
Yeah.
When I left policing and started working with Andrew. Because of course that's what lawyers do, don't they? Wear these pinstripe suits.
Pinstripe suits, yeah.
And certainly when I was in my CID days. But I'm not, I'm not a solicitor that would go around to your house. I don't do that. I'm not practicing as a solicitor. And actually, a client said to me when they instructed me at the end, I never asked for instructions, by the way.
Yeah.
Never asked for instructions. They asked me, please, can you go ahead? Which I think is lovely.
Yeah.
Because you're not there to sell anything.
Yeah, to advise and help.
Absolutely. And even if they don't go with me, as long as I've given them a heads up on stuff, and that makes them better and equipped, I'm happy. But a client said to me afterwards, He said, you know, when you rocked up, Barry, and you went through and you came up the gate of the garden path, he said, I said to my missus, he said, oh, here comes the Grim Reaper. He said, because you're in this pinstripe suit. He said, I'm thinking, here's Dr. Death. But actually, joking aside, he's spot on.
Yeah.
Because I'm not the Grim Reaper. I'm not Dr. Death. I'm actually somebody that, you know, we have to have a bit of a giggle about these things as well.
Because we're all going to die.
No one is immortal. So having a relaxed conversation about stuff that we don't really like to talk about. Like I don't like talking about my illness to the nth degree, but I do share it with my clients because they need to know that if I've got an appointment at 10 o'clock tomorrow and I can't make it, I can just phone up and say, look, I'm having a bad day tomorrow. I can't make it.
Yeah.
It's not going to think of Barry. It's fine because I know all about them and they know all about me.
Yeah.
And that's what's nice about this job because they are clients. Yes, they pay for my service and I'm not cheap and cheerful. No, I'm not. And I make no apologies for that. But what I do is make sure that actually, if you do instruct me, we're bonded for life.
Yeah.
As long as you're around and as long as I'm around.
Yeah.
Because our lives will continue to evolve. Things will happen. You know, I might find love again. Who knows?
But that's it.
Things happen in life. And actually, you need somebody that's by your side that will go with you, just like you do in your industry, where you probably have a client. I mean, you take my daughter, for example.
Yeah.
Prime example, first-time buyer. She's probably in her lifetime, and you're a young man, so she's probably going to be coming to you on at least maybe 4 or 5 occasions to sort out her mortgage.
Yeah.
So you're with her as long as you're around.
Yeah.
And she's going to be with you. She isn't going to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
And that's lovely. And I think my business is no different because they're there for keeps, really. And you know, they know that I'm not going to be around. And they know that Andrew and the resilience that Andrew offers gives me absolute peace of mind that I can still have integrity with my clients and say, look, if I'm not around, don't worry. Andrew's team will look after you.
Yeah.
The same thing that I've given you.
Yeah.
That's the bit what I like about the resilience that Andrew offers. And he's a great guy, and Secure Inheritance are great because they are not also chasing the money.
Yeah. Which is, it makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
It does. And will writing, some will writing companies, like I said, there are some really good ones who've got the same ethos. But there are also some will writing companies that have given terrible advice, sold a product that somebody doesn't need.
Yeah.
And actually has caused them a problem.
Yeah.
And the minute they challenge, there's nowhere to go to because they're not regulated.
This is it. I think it comes from in business as well. It's my view personally is it's a mindset thing of how you want your business to be, whether you're, like we talk about, client centric or money focused. And I think that shows just based on that kind of individual's personality, really. There is one question I want to ask you before we wrap up. How do you want to be remembered when all this is done?
Do you know what? I think I'd like people to think, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, I was talking about self-reflection earlier, Adam.
Yeah.
And I said, we can be our worst enemy.
We can.
And I think for me, all I would say is I would like someone to think that actually, I did meet Barry and what a nice man he was.
Yeah.
Not about what you did or, you know, he was great. He was great as a detective. None of that. Because all that happens because you go through life and things happen.
Yeah.
And you evolve and you mature and you look at life differently. But all I'd like to think is that, you know, my daughter, I'd love my daughter to say I was a good dad.
Yeah.
And I was a good person. And I think anyone I come into contact with, I would just like them to say the same thing. Nothing more.
Yeah.
nothing more. Because actually, I don't think you could actually want for anything else. I certainly wouldn't like anyone to think, oh yeah, he was absolutely brilliant at his job, and it's a job.
Yeah.
That doesn't make you.
Yeah.
What makes you is all the things that's happened in your lifetime. So I think all I would like to be remembered for is, do you know what? He came into my life doing this, whatever that is, daughter, partner, client, cop, me and you.
Yeah.
Our sound guy that's doing everything.
Yeah.
When you leave, because that's how you get remembered, not just when you die, but when you leave and you've come into contact with somebody, what's that interaction been like? And I think if you can walk away, and you'll never know, but you walk away and that person says, you know what, I remember Barry because he was a really nice guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people want, don't they? Because I don't think anybody really wants to be remembered for being that bloody horrible, cantankerous, old, grumpy detective.
Yeah.
Or we all have our rubbish days, of course we do. But I'd just like someone to see. It's interesting when we talk about funerals and planning and all this sort of stuff. I've made it very clear to my daughter I do not want an elaborate, big show.
Yeah.
I want a very quiet, unassuming affair. Because I just want people just to, so even at that level, I certainly wouldn't want people to stand up and showboat me.
Yeah.
It fills me with dread.
Yeah.
All I would like is that, somebody says, oh, what a nice guy he was.
Yeah.
That's all you can ask for, isn't it?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Barry. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I've loved it. Thank you
so much.